I'm kind of very delighted to be kind of almost properly back in the deanery in Bangor. There are no pictures on the wall, so I'm feeling it's very bare and pink at the moment. But some pictures will appear at some stage in the future for future class meetings. It's good to be being joined from London. Alex, am I right? You're in London? I haven't checked where you are this evening.
Yes,
but I think Alex is in.
Yeah, I'm in London at the moment. Yeah.
So, all the way from the imperial capital to the Athens of the north here in Bangor. I'm delighted that Alex has made time to join us this evening, and it's been huge fun to be working with Alex over these past few weeks, indeed month, as he's been preparing his commissioned piece of music for us, a setting of Saith Air y Groes, the 7 words from the cross that we'll be hearing in a devotional context at the Cathedral at 6 o'clock on the evening of Good Friday. Very much looking forward to that. And we'll talk a bit about the composition itself later in this conversation. But Alex, let's start with a bit of an introduction to you. Tell us a bit about yourself. Where were you brought up? Where do you live now? What do you do? Those are my kind of over to you for you questions.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thanks for having me. You might be able to hear a siren. I'm not sure. I'm in central London at the moment, but I'm from Pembrokeshire originally, and I grew up there. And I moved to London when I was 18 to study, but I go back as often as I can to Pembrokeshire, and my heart is very much there, and my home is very much there. As Sean mentioned, I'm a composer, and I work across lots of different mediums, really. I write for orchestra, I write chamber music, I write choral music, some for art station, really of things. Okay.
Alex, we've lost you a little bit there. Now we've lost Alex. Have we lost Alex completely? No, we haven't. Sorry, Alex, we missed a bit of that, and I'm not sure whether that was my connection or whether it was yours. I'm looking at Rob to say, Rob, were you missing that too, or was it my connection here?
Both your connections are bad and come up as red on this end.
That's annoying. Alex, I think you're back. Can you say something? See if I can hear you.
Yeah. God, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Rob, be a tiny bit more proactive with a thumbs upness so that I can see at least from you if you're hearing me and if you're hearing Alex. Yeah, cool. Okay. Alex, jump in again with your composing now and the genres across which you work.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a composer. I work across lots of different mediums. So I write for orchestras, I write choral music, I write opera, I write some music for advertising sometimes. I work with visual artists sometimes to create installations. So a real mix of music, really. And I quite like not being a specialist, if you like, because some composers, they can be a choral composer or they specialize in a certain thing. I feel like different types of music and different instruments and voices are to be used for different things and different projects. So I like working on a variety of projects. Yeah.
And did you always want to be a composer? Is that where you started?
So I grew up playing the piano, actually. The piano was my gateway into music. And I remember hearing Debussy on the radio, some piano preludes, actually. And they just captivated me as a 5-year-old. I don't know why, but I'm very thankful to the reason, whatever that might be, that they fascinated me, and I just wanted to play them. I just became obsessed with wanting to learn to play them. So I learned the piano, but I quickly realized that I didn't really enjoy mastering a technique or being able to just be able to play a piece that someone wrote 100 or 200 years ago or more perfectly. That didn't really interest me. I liked the expressive potential of music. And I suppose before I'm a composer and before I'm a musician, I'm a creative person. I think that's what I am. And so music happens to be the tool or the medium that I use to express my creativity. So yeah, I was fascinated by music as a way to do that. But it started with the piano and started with Debussy, and I didn't really enjoy taking the grades. You know, it's obviously an amazing way to learn music and to master an instrument is to go through the grades, and that I think it's brilliant. But it so happens that for me, I was more interested in experimenting and improvising at the piano rather than doing scales and learning how to play scales perfectly. And I'm not sure if you know, but there's a parallel grade system to the Associated Board of the Royal Schools of Music, which is what most people do, which is actually a jazz grade system where you're encouraged to improvise. I wouldn't say jazz is my favorite genre of music, but when I was a teenager, I did delve into that sort of syllabus because it promoted and encouraged creativity and expressivity. So yeah, that's my background in terms of becoming interested in composing.
You're speaking to somebody who used to see how long into my viola lessons I could get without actually having to play anything, by persuading Edward Davis and Marie Bridge to talk to me about music, and even occasionally to play some recordings. And if I got 25 minutes into the lesson without having betrayed how little I'd practiced, that was a good thing. I actually wish I'd had the confidence when I was 16 or 17 to say, I'm not gonna be a good viola player, but I love talking to you about music. Can we just do that instead? It would have been a better use of my parents' money, but hey ho. You also studied journalism as a young person too, and is there a connection there in your mind between that kind of creativity and use of words to express, and the creativity of music and the interplay of ideas too?
Yeah, definitely. So by the time I was 17 and deciding what to study at university, and at that time it feels like you're deciding what you're going to do with the rest of your life, I thought that I didn't want to study music because it would ruin this power it had for me, this expressive, creative joy and that I had for it. So I thought studying it and making it my job would ruin it for me. So my other interest and passion is writing words. So I studied journalism at 18, and that's why I moved to London originally. And I actually loved it, but a few years after graduating, I realized that my heart wasn't in it. My heart was in music. So then I made tracks back into music and pursuing that instead. But to answer your question about the link, I do see them very much as linked because, you know, I still do some freelance writing and copywriting because I enjoy it. And I see the writing of words and the writing of music as two different, it sounds very unromantic, but two different ways of creating content in a way. So I can have an idea, I can express it in words. I have an idea, I can express it in music. Of course, music allows me to be much more expansive often, and it's where my passion really is. But writing of words is also a sort of parallel interest of mine. And I think that it's the journalism studying that got me interested in sort of source material, the idea of getting inspiration from different archival sources or historic sources in terms of almost being an investigative journalist. So a lot of my projects, actually, my music projects, involve historic source material. And I see a kind of coming together of both of those parts of what I do in that respect, for sure.
We're going to talk a bit about some of your compositions in a bit more depth in a moment. I wonder about your compositional style, where you've begun to touch a bit on it there. What would your perfect composition commission be, and how do you go about it?
They are three really difficult questions in one. I love that. First of all, when it comes to style, that's the hardest question to answer as a composer, and I guess maybe as any artist. And in terms of commission, yeah, it's hard. I am very, I guess at the core of things for me, I am very interested, as I've sort of started touching on, of music's power to express emotion and express our humanity. And it sounds like an obvious thing to say that. And I have said that in sort of academic settings with other composers, and they've sort of not quite laughed at me, but they've said, well, of course, all music does that. But when it comes to contemporary music and music being written right now, so much of it doesn't move me. And that's obviously my own taste and my own approach. But if we take it for granted that music expresses emotions, then why does so much of it not make me feel moved? is my provocation. So I'm very interested in actually consciously exploring how music can express how we feel, what makes us human, human emotion. And so my style can vary quite a lot, actually, from one piece to another. Sometimes it can be a bit more experimental, depending on the setting. Other times it's much more conventional, I suppose. But the philosophy, if you like, behind it all is the kind that I'm describing now. And in terms of commission, it's always, I really love commissions where I can bring that approach to it. So I know we'll talk about it in a bit more detail later, but the piece that I've been working on for the Cathedral is obviously a very amazing opportunity to be able to do that, to express humanity in that particular context and emotions. And when it comes to my approach to composing, I think because the piano was my way in, I think the best at the piano. So I always start at the piano. It sounds a bit left field, but I do improvise and just I try and express how I'm feeling about the piece or the subject or the particular movement that I'm writing or the text that I'm setting, and just see what comes out. And I start there. It's quite intuitive in that sense. It's quite, I don't know where it comes from, and I don't want to know, but it comes from somewhere. And it kind of, for me, it all marries together in an approach that isn't overly academic, it isn't overly rigid, it isn't too anchored in history in terms of music history. There's a sense of fluidity and freedom to my approach as a composer, and also hopefully to the music that I write. And I guess it's probably a life's work to sort of see where that ends up and to hone that approach over the years. In recent pieces, I've actually been experimenting with trying to incorporate meditation techniques, just such as breathing, into the music making process. So I've been working with opera singers and also small choral ensembles in what I call musical meditations, where the music unfolds to the rhythm of each individual's breath. So it's sort of encouraging the singers in this situation to express themselves, to bring something of themselves even more than they would normally, to bring their own vulnerability almost to the piece. The piece I've worked on for Good Friday doesn't do that. I don't go that far in this piece, but I just gave that as an example to show the kinds of ideas that interest me in terms of getting to the root of why we're making music. Why would I write a piece of music that is an academic exercise for someone to sing perfectly somewhere at some time? I mean, that's perfect reason to write a piece if you want. It's just not the one that excites me. What excites me is writing music that allows some kind of human expressivity and self-expression from the performers, and also to encourage that in the audience as well. So yeah, that's my probably complicated answer to your complicated questions.
I'm not letting the cat out of the bag here. Your composition for Good Day is done and dusted, more or less, and you're waiting for something from me, for exactly, which is not musical at all, but some material for the publication of it itself. Colleagues here will know that if I was a composer and I was composing something to be performed on Good Friday, it would be Maundy Thursday, and I would be 3/4 of the way through. I'm struck by how organised you've been in your working and your composing, and I suppose that this is one of the first artistic commissions I've been part of, and I was expecting to have a conversation with you on Holy Monday to say how's it going, but actually it's done, and you've been very methodical, but in that context of beginning with improvisation as well. How do you work in terms of your own composing discipline?
I think that the journalism training has helped me more than I know when it comes to being a musician. So meeting a deadline is a huge thing for me, and I often like to be early for things. It's just, I think that's my nature. I think every composer is different with that. I think composers do tend to be late rather than early, but I don't know. I think a lot of it comes with trusting myself. And again, it sounds a bit vague, but I trust the ideas that come to me. I don't overthink them. I do work them and develop them a lot. They go through a rigorous process after I've started with improvisation, but the raw ideas come quickly for me. And I'm touching wood at the moment, but I haven't yet had the problem of writer's block or not having access to those raw ideas wherever they come from. My hard work is in how I develop them, I suppose, and that's the bit that comes after. So the raw ideas, which can just be a motif, melody, and chords, progression of some kind, can actually come very quickly, and then they can spend weeks and months in development, being pieced together into a bigger structure. I think also before I start, often before I write a note of music, I've already done a lot of thinking. Almost, it's the notes and that improvising exercise I described actually come quite late in the compositional process. I mean, I used to, you hear the stories of Mozart or Beethoven imagining a whole symphony in their heads, whilst out on a walk. You hear those sort of myths, and that always used to intimidate me a lot. The idea of that, but I wondered if it's not how it sounds in that sense. You can because composing is like architecture, I think, in that it's about structure. You can have the best musical ideas, but if they're not presented in the right structure, then it will fall flat, or it will just be a sort of chaotic mess of ideas. And I think the idea of hearing a whole symphony or a whole piece in your head, for me, is actually just working out the structure in your head and the shape of it all, which you can do in your head without knowing necessarily all of the little bits of detail of the music at that point. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, before I start writing, before I'm at the piano, I've done a lot of thinking. I often do write words as well about my idea and my ideas and my thought process, what I'm thinking about the piece, the ideas about structure that I'm thinking about in a kind of journal before I write a note. And with this particular piece, visiting the cathedral in December was a big part of that. So going there, meeting you and some familiar faces here, hearing the choir, that was part of my sort of think process. So the piece was already being written then in my head, I guess, even though I didn't know what it was going to sound like completely. It's hard to explain, and I really don't know how it happens, but that's just the way I experience it.
It's not entirely dissimilar to writing sermons, I suppose, actually, that,
Yeah.
that before writing something, I kind of want to know what I've said, and it's only my panic is more about not knowing than the writing and the working of it. One of the reasons why I think we were excited to be working with you at the point of choosing composers was that you'd already, by that stage, composed 2 operas. And I remember going to my first opera at university and just being overwhelmed by the complexity of it all, by this vast thing pulled together involving music, but also story and libretto and performance and staging. Talk to us about one. I think you're going to talk to us about Dear Marie Stopes, one of your first opera composition. Tell us a bit about how that came about and what the end composition ended up being like.
Okay, sure. So this particular opera is called Dear Marie Stopes, and it's about the birth control pioneer Marie Stopes. Some people know a lot about her, some people don't know anything about her, but essentially she founded the first birth control clinic in the UK and went on to be known as a pioneer in women's health, reproductive health, contraception, controversially, as well as in an amazing way. In terms of her thoughts and ideas were controversial for reasons there still are today around birth control. But this is a good example of using historical source material. So I am a bit of a geek when it comes to hunting out more obscure archives for inspiration. And it was in, I think, the Wellcome collection in London, the Museum of Medical History had an exhibition, and they were exhibiting a few letters that were written to Marie Stopes shortly after she published a book in 1918, which was the first real book published about women's health and reproductive health, which was a pioneering book called Married Love. And the book caused a huge storm, really. It was reprinted dozens of times. It went around the world. If any of you are familiar with Downton Abbey, when one of the daughters gets pregnant, it's that book that they consult, because it was the only book or source at the time that would give any kind of answer as to what was going to happen in that situation. So the response to the book to describe how big an impact it had in the social media age. okay, I had a lesson. That was
Alex, I think we've lost you for a second, and I think the connection may be calming down, so let's just give it a moment. I think perhaps the mention of Downton Abbey caused so much excitement that the broadband usage was boosted for a second. I think we're back with you, so go from that point.
Yes. So I was just talking about the impact that this one book had on the world, to understand with social media, but one book went around the whole world, and she received tens of thousands of letters in response from people who'd read the book. And these letters, tens of thousands of them, are all in the Wellcome collection in a huge archive. And so I came across this and I thought, this is amazing. This is amazing source material, because the letters are archived in a really particular way. Some are from actually members of the clergy voicing their opinions about this book at that time. But the most of the letters are from everyday people, from as far-flung places as Bermuda, who hold of the book, asking Marie Stopes for more information about what they were going through in their lives, particularly around having children, having families, and reproductive and sexual health, actually. And so the opera, the opera uses fragments of all of these letters to create a conversation around issues of, I suppose, bodily freedom, the right for someone to choose what happens to their body, abortion, the idea of contraception. And it's sort of, a lot of these letters, they were written 100 years ago, but some of them could have been written today. And it was around the time of the Me Too movement, and also abortion laws in the US sort of, getting, well, ebbing and flowing, they do as they do. And I'm not necessarily a huge pro-choice abortion campaigner myself. I'm just interested in this idea of a historic source like this, to shine a light on an important topic facing us and society now, and sort of being able to delve into an archive of letters. I think that the discussions around this topic are still so relevant, and the piece doesn't give any answers or judgment or opinion, but it was the whole 360 dimensions and perspectives of this topic using historic source material. So yeah, I mean, it's quite a complicated topic and project to describe, but I hope it's making some kind of sense.
And just before you were with us in Bangor at the end of last year, another composition of yours had just been premiered in St David's that had its own very specific and interesting historical context too. Tell us about that composition and its premiere.
Yeah, so this was a commission from the BBC National Orchestra of Wales, and it was for the St David's Cathedral Festival, which was a really special commission for me because I grew up not far from St David's, and obviously BBC National Orchestra of Wales. It was really a lovely commission, bringing together lots of threads of my life. And the piece is called Landsker, Landsker, because in Pembrokeshire there is a feature of that you can see on some maps called the Landsker line, and it's an invisible boundary that historically divides Welsh and English speaking Pembrokeshire and their associated customs and culture. It's a line that is marcated by a string of castles that were built by invaders and defenders in the 11th and 12th centuries. So the piece explores the idea of a line, a boundary between two different worlds, two different cultures, two different pieces of history. And it's traceable in the sort of place names of that are above and below the line. The church architecture of the architecture of the churches above and below this line is different. And obviously the distribution of Welsh language and where it's spoken in the area. And so again, it's sort of an example of, yeah, using history as a way to create a composition. It's a very different one to the opera, but it's still, I guess, the two projects for me exemplify this approach of wanting to write music about real issues, because even though this is a historic line, you know, it's from a time when the I guess war between England and Wales, let's not talk about Saturday afternoon, was more violent, I suppose, but it's nevertheless still part of our culture now. The as I say, the rivalry between nations. So I'm not afraid to look at provocative source material either, as you can tell. But I think, again, it comes back to why would I be an artist now? Why would I be a composer now if I don't talk about topics that affect us? Again, it goes back to me not wanting to learn how to play Bach perfectly and leaving it there. I want to create pieces of music that raise questions or inspire conversations, I suppose, rather than just sort of, you know, do something nice and leave it there.
I'm not sure this question is going to make sense, but I want to ask something about you've talked there a lot about intellectual history, about ideas in source material. I perhaps especially with the St David's composition, where that has to be transformed from verbalized concepts, from stuff that you could describe in a paragraph, to something where orchestral music has to do all of the talking for you. Can you say a bit about how that translation of your engagement with the history and the ideas and the controversy, how that translates itself into music, into notes played and heard?
Yes, so with the Lanska, it was quite a clear idea, but that came from the thinking before music was written. So we're dealing with the subject of a line. Of course, music lends itself really well to that idea because a melody is a line. So in Lanska, we hear one line of music, one melody played by the whole orchestra in unison. So it's one very, very clear line. And then the line is exploded in lots of different layers that overlap each other, that also speak of the complexities of what that line represents. So that is quite a literal translation, really, of the idea of a line that divides a complex kind of two complex areas, if you like. With Dear Marie Stopes, the idea of just having lots of fragments and lots of voices saying the fragments, that brought alive the idea of there being so many different angles on a issue and presenting them all simultaneously. So yeah, it's different for every project, but you hit the nail on the head really with it. Is, for me, it's about finding the best way to musically, translate these ideas, into music.
Cool. Let's move on to the Bangor composition. So on Good Friday, we're going to hear your setting of the 7 last words from the cross. Let me describe briefly what I think it's going to be like, and let me ask you to jump in with your reflections on any bit of the composition as it stands. So they're the 7 last words from the cross, 7 sentences uttered by Christ in the Gospels from the cross, and in the setting that we're using the translation from the 1588 William Morgan translation of the Bible into the Welsh. We're augmenting the words of Jesus in some of the 7 words with some additional voices from the Passion narrative, and in a couple of occasions with some couplets from Edmund Priest's translation of the Psalms into Welsh that were part of that same 16th, 17th century translation project, where part of Jesus's words are occasionally themselves references to the Psalms that would have been part of his Jewish heritage. And those 7 last words for us, they've been the subject of compositions over the last 500 years in different ways. Some of them choral, some of them orchestral. For us, they're going to become 7 movements sung by the choir, unaccompanied, apart from a surprise at the end of the last one, and we're going to hear them as 7 individual movements, but flowing one through another on Good Friday. But also, we've been a little bit cheeky here, because we then have 7 pieces of music for the price of 1, because we'll be able to sing the movements as standalone compositions, as evensong anthems and the like, because they'll have their own life as well as existing within that cycle of 7 movements that tell their own story. So really looking forward to hearing it, and to hearing it within the devotional context of Good Friday as well, composed for our choir, having you, Alex, having heard them, engaged with them, spoken to Joe, and explored what we enjoy doing here. Which bit of that composition has been most energizing for you, and what are you pleased about in the piece of music that's emerged?
Well, one of the things I was thinking about with this piece is, for me, so much, I feel so much of religious art, in visual art, music, I feel puts a distance between us and the subject matter. And I can see why that approach, I can see the benefits of that approach. But for me, I wanted to bring it much closer and more intimate and more direct and more human. It goes back to what I was talking about earlier. So for me, finding a way to make this incredible story, this incredible text, which is so huge, but is also so human in a way, in how it is one person's 7 last words before he dies and transcends. How to make it intimate and how to make it direct. And I think that, again, some composers think that they have to be very, what's the word, complicated to try and impress perhaps an audience or other musicians. But I think that I'm very pleased with how the decision to just serve the text, to write music that serves it and not obscure it or over decorate it, to make it as immediate and impactful as possible, is something that I really tried to do with this piece. Because other contemporary or more contemporary versions of this setting, I find are awesome, and they inspire awe, but I don't know if I get to the intimacy of what that must have been like for those assembled at that time to witness and to experience. And I'm not saying that my piece does that, but it is an effort to try and get closer to that. Yeah.
You mentioned you'd spent time, spent some time up with us here in December. You were here for what I thought was a wonderful performance of Messiah on the fourth Sunday of Advent, a performance that came from who we are here, I think, as a community musically, with the performers stepping out of the chorus to sing their solos, a reflection of the community music making of the choir here. And one of the lovely things about working with you is that you've been interested in us and have wanted to get to know us here. If it's not giving away your secrets or indeed your uncomplimentary thoughts about us, what about us and the music making here, or the geography or the architecture or the sense of place or community that you encountered, how has that shaped your composing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really glad you mentioned the performance of the Messiah, because that really inspired me. It really inspired me by how Joe used it as an opportunity to showcase different voices within the choir, different personalities, different people, and the whole community, really. It wasn't sort of, one soloist hogging the limelight or whatever. It was very much a very communal community experience of music making. And so the piece that I've written has lots of solos in it, and duos and little sort of cameos here and there throughout the whole piece. And I've suggested to Joe some ideas about who might sing them, but I'm leaving it up to Joe. So it's sort of that, in that way of bringing the personalities both as individuals in those sort of soloistic moments, but also the collective cumulative identity of the choir as being one that does that and showcase different voices is something that's really important to this piece. And also I wrote it for those voices, for what I heard, their strengths to be. I mean, it's hard to talk about strengths because, like I said before, I don't really approach music in that sort of hierarchical way of being of sort of academic excellence. But I just saw the sort of the passion of the choir of singing together in this very, I keep using the word community, communal driven way, but that's just how it felt to me. And that's what I try to do in the piece as well. There's lots of sort of smaller choruses within the bigger chorus. So it's quite lots of different sort of layers to it that I'm really looking forward to hearing the choir sing.
We're looking forward to it very much on Good Friday. It's going to be towards the end of what's going to be quite an epic week for us, where hopefully with our new furniture in place, which we'll use to help with movement and scene setting and scene changing during the week. We're beginning with Bach's John Passion on Palm Sunday in the evening, having gotten over our experience with the two donkeys in the morning. Moving through our 6 o'clock observances on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and the washing of feet, and then 6 o'clock on Friday evening, and into the silence of Good Friday, the uttering of those 7 last words. Looking forward to it very much. And Alex, you're going to be up with us for the performance itself, and to enjoy a bit more of Holy Week with us, and you'll be giving a pre-performance talk in conversation with me before the performance itself at 4:45 on that evening, where we'll talk a bit more about the composition itself and explore its movements. So looking forward to that too. It's going to be more than a performance, isn't it? Before the observance, the devotional engagement with the composition, with those 7 last words at 6 o'clock on Good Friday.